Okay, so this is the last piece of this report on technologies for adaptation in the water sector. This is about adaptation responses and technologies for disaster preparedness. Disaster preparedness must include, post-disaster access to not only health or food and so on, but water often tends to be the most critical one in terms of just surviving. Right? You can live for a long time without food actually, but you will die much quicker if there is no water. That's something body has evolved to do. So adaptation response in terms of early warning, always critical for disaster preparedness, which we have looked at in several podcasts, several courses, and there is a full course on subseasonal to seasonal forecasting for water health, energy, agriculture, etc. on my channel as well. So technologies, flood forecasting systems, drought forecasting systems, early warning systems for floods, landslide and mud flow warning systems, decentralized community run early warning systems, drought early warning systems, so that's different than the drought forecasting system, flash flood guidance system, and real-time monitoring networks. Let's read a couple of sentences from each of the technology. Flood forecasting systems. Flood forecasting systems help forecast potential flooding events before they occur. Forecasts increase lead time for the public to prepare and evacuate and helps provide an adequate response to minimize flood damage. This is similar to cyclones and so on, and the advancements in cyclone forecasting, I would say, is somewhat better than flood forecasting, because how a heavy rainfall event becomes flood is not always very straightforward. It depends on many factors like the built environment, land use, vegetation, slopes, and so on and so forth. Drought forecasting system. Drought forecasting systems use models fed by climatic and atmospheric data, so historical, seasonal weather patterns, real-time meteorological monitoring, and weather forecasts to predict the probability of a drought occurring in a region or area of interest in the future up to approximately 3 months. So you can take the monsoon forecast, which often depends on El Nino forecast, and then say this year could be deficit rainfall, but then you have to get much more granular in terms of which region of India, for example, could have deficit rainfall, because now you have a distribution of rainfall such that average, seasonal average, countrywide average of rainfall may look normal, but there will be some regions with heavy drought and some regions with heavy rain, of course. Early warning systems for floods. The main purpose of early warning systems is to issue warnings when a flood is imminent or already occurring. So you can think of it as a ready, set, go framework, which is what we use in the subseasonal to seasonal forecasting applications. So let's say the seasonal forecast of the monsoon readies the system in terms of disaster preparedness, where there are likelihoods, where there may be need for aid, for shelters, for protection against droughts and floods, wildfires, whatever may come, and then set and go steps happen with shorter time forecast, maybe weeks 2 to 4 or day 1 to 10 and so on. So then you actually begin to move the people, rescue workers, equipment, and medical supplies, water, etc., maybe food, to places which are now more reliably forecasted to go under flood or drought. Okay, landslide and mud flow warning systems that produce a warning when there is a danger of landslide or mud flow event in an area, improving disaster preparedness and minimizing event risks. Very similar, but much more difficult again, because converting rainfall into landslide or mudslide is not trivial. Often analog forecasts are used, so past data is used to relate to amount of rain, slope, etc., to provide probabilistic forecasts of the dangers of landslide or mudslide. Decentralized community-run early warning systems, low-cost technology for improving disaster preparedness run by local community members. The community members use simple equipment to forecast potential natural disasters such as floods, landslides, and drought, and operate a communication dissemination system to inform other local residents of impending threats. Oftentimes, credibility and trust may be higher when the information comes from someone they know, rather than from a text from some centralized agency whose skill may not be established yet. So empirical, experiential knowledge with information coming from someone you know can often lead to better response to disaster early warnings. Drought early warning systems. A drought early warning system's purpose is to warn local communities when there is a risk of a drought, improving preparedness and decreasing risks associated with crop and food loss. Effective warning systems require drought monitoring using appropriate drought indicators, meteorological data and forecasts, a warning signal, public awareness and education, institutional cooperation, and data sharing arrangements. So it's a kind of a end-to-end system where numerical forecasts or weather forecasts are one thing, and then it has to be translated to potential for drought and set off actions in terms of maybe changing the crop calendar, crop selection, or hedging your bets for saving grains for the post-drought season, or not wasting fertilizer and water on land that may just suffer from crop wilting due to drought, and so on and so forth. Plus last mile gaps in terms of institutional cooperation and data sharing arrangements. Flash flood guidance systems. Specialized forecasting and early warning systems for flash floods. Flash flood guidance systems are designed to provide forecasts with data that allows them to predict a potential flash flood, usually a few hours before it hits, and produce an early warning to increase preparedness. As we said, we also have flash droughts now, and there are efforts to forecast those as well. Real-time monitoring networks, systems of sensors and radars and the accompanying computer systems to track changes in hydrological conditions in near real time. Real-time monitoring provides an important source of information for early warning systems and timely flood preparedness. So obviously preparedness. And remember, we are still in the context of water, so it's disaster preparedness also to protect water. Supply, access, quantity, quality, etc. Disaster response itself includes stacking of sandbags combined with the use of ground improvement technology for basic restoration and reinforcement and restoration. So sand-filled cloth bags are stacked to create stable structure that can hold back water and sediment flowing down during flooding or storm events, which you have seen many times, I'm sure, may have even experienced, may have participated in putting up sandbags, etc. Sandbag barriers are temporary blockades that protect buildings and populations from inundation damage and associated economic loss. Kind of a low-cost, crowdsourced, no regret kind of decision, so that even if forecasts are wrong, if the cyclone was supposed to come here and you prepare with sandbags but it goes there, not much harm is done in terms of investment of labor and and removing the sandbags once the cyclone passes. Flood disaster preparedness indices, FDPI, used to assess the preparedness of a local community to tackle flood situations. FDPI is made up of 8 indices, each affiliated to a different aspects of flood disaster preparedness. The indices are state of infrastructure, mitigation plans, mitigation systems, evacuation plans, recovery plans, information and education, collaboration, and community strength. Okay, they are based on self-assessment, replying to a number of questions related to each aspect. Communication protocols are needed, flood shelters, so strong elevated structures that can be used by local residents for refuge during an extreme weather event. Many people don't evacuate their homes and end up in the attic, or maybe floods rise even higher, or you end up having mold and disease problems and so on that you are living with, that should be avoided, can be avoided if you have shelters with elevated structures. Social media applications for disaster response and mapping, as I mentioned before, Twitter, Facebook and many others have now become useful for this. Uses social media applications, this system, to disseminate information during or following a disaster, and allows for those affected by a disaster to be in touch with disaster relief organizations, friends and family. Information transmitted via these applications can also be used by emergency teams to determine the scale of the disaster and pinpoint specific locations in affected areas. National and community disaster management plans created to improve disaster risk management governance from the state to local level. National disaster management plans incorporate disaster risk management into national policies and establish a framework that clearly specifies the roles of the responsible institutions and committees. It is like a military drill. When a disaster warning goes up, disaster management plan has to kick in. Equipment, people, line of command all have to be in place so that loss of life and property can be minimized, right? This is very critical, and India has done better and better over the recent years for managing heat waves, cyclones, extreme rainfall, floods, droughts, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's conclude this report here, and then we'll come back and look at another one on guidance for adaptation in the water sector, which has some overlapping points but many different and new points which we'll cover. Okay, see you in the next podcast.